Nature strongholds, wild places with thriving ecosystems and intact habitats, are our best defense against biodiversity loss and climate change. We imagine these places as untouched by humans, but this is a misconception. These places are homes to countless Indigenous and traditional peoples. They are the foundation for their livelihoods, well-being, and cultural identities. In fact, more than 30% of the world's land is already conserved by their traditional knowledge and management practices. WCS is committed to supporting Indigenous and traditional communities in securing and exercising their land rights. Though this wasn't always the case for WCS and other global conservation organizations. Only by building long-term relationships and supporting the efforts of these communities can we protect natural areas, reduce industrial pressures, and right centuries of injustice, including by WCS. The partnership between conservation organizations and traditional communities is evidence of diverse perspectives and equitable power sharing in STEM. In this episode, we will spotlight 3 stories of communities working to secure and protect wildlife and wild places: the tribes of Papua New Guinea, the Garifuna Fishers in Belize, and the Blackfeet Nation. Let's explore these stories and embrace traditional communities, practices, and diversity in STEM.
Intact ecosystems are those places where there's almost full assemblages of native plants and animals, and they're interacting at their ecological densities. These are remarkable places. They're really the last manuals for nature. They're particularly precious now that we have all the pressure of climate change, because only these intact places are likely to survive the extinction bottleneck that climate change is driving our Earth systems through. Who lives in those intact places? Indigenous peoples and local communities. So the interests of communities, the aspirations of communities, the desires of communities, the concerns of communities are central to us achieving our mission of saving wildlife and wild places. So working with Indigenous peoples and local communities makes perfect ethical sense, and it makes perfect practical sense. It's the right thing to do. We have millions of different communities. Each community thinks about nature, thinks about conservation, thinks about wildlife and wild places differently. If we're going to conserve wildlife and wild places, we have to respect those different communities. We have to acknowledge those different communities. We have to understand those different communities. And most of all, we have to work respectfully and effectively with those different communities.
You know, we're a seafaring nation. Like over 30,000 persons directly benefit from Belize's fisheries sector. It's a part of our culture, I have to say as well. Fishing is traditional. It's based on family and community, whereby you learn the tradition and the practices from your family members or from community members.
I'm a fisherwoman. I spend my time by going out fishing, lobstering, crabbing. Well, it's very important because it creates jobs for us.
The seascape of Belize is basically divided into different fishing zones, and that is something that was brought about by fishers. So it's not something that an NGO or the fisheries department came up with, but fishers brought that about through advisory committee. Advisory committee is established for each marine protected area, and so your advisory committee is made up of stakeholders, your fishers, local government representative. We usually have a representative from the fisheries department, the NGO that co-manages the marine protected area. Based on the issues that are discussed at these committees, it does require involvement of these different entities to address them or take them to a higher level for them to be addressed.
The managing committee there, from the cooperative, they represent the fishermen. We need consultation with the fishers. As we, the fishers out there, we know what is practical. We just got some new laws. No consultation was done.
The weight that the advisory committee has in terms of affecting management, it needs to be strengthened. Issues aren't being dealt with in a timely manner.
We have had opportunities with WCS that they have been giving us seminars, conferences, forums, trainings, giving us these kind of things, for us to uplift ourselves.
So it allows people to become more acquainted about how the marine protected area is being managed.
WCS was established in 1895. That's a long time ago. And how we thought about community in 1895 was quite different.
I think the early years of the New York Zoological Society, of the Wildlife Conservation Society, and similar to other organizations at the time, the approach was very much a colonialist one.
Initially, WCS founding fathers thought the only way to conserve nature was to remove people from nature.
The focus now is on bringing these pieces together, braiding together Indigenous knowledge and Western conservation science.
We're really one of the few lucky people to still have a really unique and intact culture. Being able to, have our Blackfeet songs, ceremonies, dances, gatherings. This is still our original territory that we've lived in for hundreds of generations. How well the land thrives and how well the landscape ecosystem is doing is how well we are doing as a people.
And bison are important for Native peoples for two reasons. One is they're ecological engineers. They make the prairie healthy. Just by being bison, just by doing what bison doing, eating grass, pooping out grass, stomping with their feet, moving as herds, they make the grasslands healthy and productive. And for Native peoples, they're the center of their cultures.
Ini, buffalo, from the beginning, they've been our main food source, our main survival source. Them becoming a part of our ceremonies, using them in our ceremonies, that's a given, right? When you depend on something so highly, buffalo are at the center of everything that we do. Ini Initiative, what we do is work on bringing home buffalo, widening their land space, community engagement, and healing. I'm really happy to say that the Ini Initiative does have some really, really awesome partners that we could pretty much say are family, and that they support us fully in what we're doing. It's that kind of relationship building that gives me hope for Indigenous-led, regionally supported communities being able to do this type of conservation work. So I put on events that celebrate buffalo and just really let the community remember what it's like and what it means to be a buffalo people and to be a part of that buffalo culture. Getting youth involved, bringing them back into looking at how to butcher a buffalo, how to use all the pieces of a buffalo, just eating buffalo meat again. They're gonna look back at this time period as when we started living with buffalo again, when the buffalo came home.
Forests of Papua New Guinea are really important because we're still an indigenous community. They're just coming to contact with civilization in the last century. So about 95% of the population are rural communities, and they heavily depend on the forest.
Lots of the people in Papua New Guinea, they survive through the forest in food, cultural importance, housing. I think there's so many things. Herbs, they need a herbal plant. And the most important thing to also is their sacred sites.
The traditional or sacred sites would mean the areas where the communities or the ancestors of the people dwelled in before they settled. It's a form of traditional sustainable management practice. So they use the taboo sites to control people from over-harvesting the forest resources. It's a form of evidence for the people that they are the rightful ownership of the area or the forest.
When WCS came on board, he saw that they did a couple of literature on tambos and how it's important to community-based conservation. Why it's so effective is, unlike any other parts of the world, all land in Papua New Guinea are traditionally owned, or I'll say customarily owned. And in Papua New Guinea, I'll say about 2% of the land is owned by the government and the rest is owned by the people.
And the conservation deed recognizes the customary ownership, and it allows that flexibility for the indigenous communities to make their own decisions regarding their forest.
Plans with the conservation deed is to safeguard their forests and lands for threat of logging and mining. So when you look into the court case of dispute over the land, these are the evidence that have to be there to produce to the court.
When clans come together and they put their land in conservation, they are actually speaking up that they are the rightful owners of this land, and they identify that land belongs to them.
By supporting Indigenous peoples, we were able to help protect more of the planet than national parks could ever do. And we could do it in a way that helped people maintain their culture, maintain their economies, maintain their well-being, look after their children, have a future for their children. How is that not a good idea? There needs to be a global acknowledgement that Indigenous peoples and local communities are the most effective stewards of the remaining intact ecosystems on the planet. Our global community needs to acknowledge that, respect that, and support that, and do all we can, both under the law and financially, to support the efforts of Indigenous peoples to protect their lands, because by protecting their lands, they're going to save the planet.